Okay, we are recording this event tonight. I need to go back and share my screen. Sharing. Okay. Does everybody see Tallahassee Scientific Society up?
Just saw your picture.
You just see my
No.
picture? You don't?
Yeah.
Okay. Sort of struggling here. Set a window. Okay. Sharing. Okay, so you see me.
Now you're on.
Okay, but I do want to maximize this, and I seem to have lost my picture when I went to this presentation mode. So let me give it another try. Okay, all right, this is good. All right, so for those of you that found this talk tonight via something other than being invited as a member, perhaps you saw it on Facebook or Meetup. I just want to tell you a little bit about Tallahassee Scientific Society, just to get my 15 seconds in before we hear from Dr. Fritz Davis, and he's going to give a wonderful talk, and one of our board members, Martin Bremer, will introduce him. But let me introduce you to Tallahassee Scientific Society. It sounds like some of you have not been muted, should have been muted as you came in. So if you would take a second and make sure you're muted so we can hear the hosts as they talk. All right, okay. Now, in the past, we had these Horizons events. So what we're going to be experiencing tonight is a live Zoomed Horizons event. But in the past, what would happen is you would buy a ticket, because we had to pay for presenters airfare and lodging, etc. So we would charge an amount so you could come and attend, but you would come to a desk and you would be greeted by our board of directors, and they would check you in, and then you would go into the auditorium where you could listen to these fantastic talks. So the image on the right here is Dr. David Kaiser, and he gave a presentation a couple of years ago on some planetary systems. And one of the things we try to do with Horizons now, well, until COVID, we would take our presenters that had come to town for the Horizons talk out into the community to meet some students in K-12 situations, or perhaps a special group of graduate students that would benefit from talking in a small group with our presenter. So this is a picture on the left of the guest lecturer, David Kaiser, talking to some sales students in their robotics club. Another thing we do, in addition to the Horizons talks, are we offer a series of field trips. And this is Dr. Greg Erickson here, who had given a Horizons talk on paleobiology. He's a paleobiologist. He gave a talk on some new features of dinosaurs. And to follow up with that, he had a field trip in his lab. So he invited members to come have a tour, and obviously children are welcome. So it was really exciting for them. We also have field trips outside, not just in labs. And this was a field trip to a special coastal environment. We also had a field trip to a power plant. So TSS is more than just the Horizons events that you're here to view tonight. So I just wanted to introduce you to that. And we try to get out and about in the community as much as possible to spread the word about being involved in science and science activities. And this was just one of the events we attended when we were all getting together and socializing more, and had some students from Leon High School that were able to man our table. And we just welcome kids to come up and draw their thoughts on what STEM activities were, or what science was, or whatever. So that's what you see there. Okay, so I am now going to turn the host position over to Martin Bremer, who is one of our outstanding board members. By the way, I'm not sure I introduced myself. I'm Carrie Maddox. I'm the president of TSS. I have a couple times been known to not introduce myself as I introduced TSS. So anyway, I've done that. And so now I'm going to introduce Martin Brimmer. And I'm going to be able to do this successfully. I'm just sure of that. There you are. Okay. Take it away, Martin.
All right. First thing I'm going to do is make sure everyone is muted, just to keep things going. I want to make sure things are great for Dr. Davis tonight. So I'm very excited to be able to host this lecture, especially with Fritz. Not only is he the department head of history at Purdue University, he's the R. Mark Lubbers Chair of History and Science. He is someone who throughout his career has been given numerous grants and awards because of his wonderful work, including ones from the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health. He was a Fulbright Senior Scholar Award winner and spent a year in Hong Kong at the Chinese University. But more importantly, Fritz was a professor of mine. I had numerous courses with him while he was at Florida State. I think I ended up signing up for a total of 4 of his courses before he went off to bigger and greater things at Purdue. And during his time here, he was at one point awarded the Graduate Teaching Award, which I can fully support and wish I had been able to say I nominated him for it. However, he had gotten it prior to my arrival. He did a lot of great work with the History and Philosophy of Science program here at FSU. And it's a really interesting way to also look at and take advantage of scientific knowledge throughout. So especially as a new board member for TSS, I wanted to be able to have a few different perspectives. So I am very excited and proud to have Fritz here tonight to give us a talk. In particular, he will be talking about Rachel Carson, and I don't want to spoil too much of his time, so I am going to make him host and turn it over to you, Fritz. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Carrie, and thanks everyone for taking some portion of your dinner time to join us tonight. When I still lived in Tallahassee, I tried to attend Tallahassee Scientific Society as regularly as I could, but I'm missing Tallahassee for a different reason tonight, and I will just quickly share that reason with you. Can you see the snow piled up on my deck? We have about 18 inches of snow, which seems to have been around for the better part of a month so far. So it's the worst winter I've experienced in Indiana. Tonight, I'd like to talk about Rachel Carson. And I'm particularly struck by the way that in all of her writings, she inspired and fostered emotions in her readers. Her books about the sea introduce readers to incredible animals and wondrous places that lay just beneath the waters of seascapes. Her descriptions of predator-prey relations and life histories captured the intricacies of life in the sea. And she addressed the significance of wonder specifically in an article published in 1958, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And for Carson, the sense of wonder was a key component of childhood that was later lost in most adults. Wonder enabled people to connect with nature and the environment. Most of you are probably familiar with Silent Spring, and in that book, Carson managed to inspire wonder with the natural world, despite the dark subject. Moreover, she showed how agricultural chemicals threatened animals, humans, and even the very fabric of life. She drew on the scientific literature and incorporated references to poetry and prose to animate a challenging and disturbing topic. However, beyond wonder, Silent Spring elicited other emotions, as most of you are probably aware. Emotions like indignation and fury at the threat pesticides pose to ecosystems, animals, and even humans. But ultimately, such anger motivated political action, which launched the environmental movement in America. So let me just take a second here and share my screen so you can join in the PowerPoint. Ordinarily, I'd want to go to presentation mode. Unfortunately, I couldn't print, so I need my second monitor to see my talk. But don't worry, we're all on the same page. So the biographical details of Carson and her books have been clearly documented. She was committed to writing from an early age, but she discovered her muse during a trip to the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole with her college biology professor, Mary Scott Skinker. The sea and the creatures within provided a limitless well of stories to research and craft. After college, she went to Johns Hopkins University, where she completed a master's degree in biology and genetics and began the doctoral program. Despite efforts to earn money through teaching biology and zoology, Carson eventually had to leave the graduate program to find a better paying job. She was, after all, the sole breadwinner for her eclectic family, which included her mother and father. Her father was struggling with illness at the time, her divorced sister, and 2 young nieces. The family's dependency on Carson increased when her father died in 1935, and then later her sister in 1937. Carson adopted a grandnephew, Roger, when his mother, one of Carson's nieces, died unexpectedly. In adversity, it seems that Carson found strength. She landed a job as a writer in the public education division of the Bureau of Fisheries, which was later absorbed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There, Carson wrote about Bureau programs and eventually drafted an essay about the sea as the basis for a brochure. Her department head told her that the title was better suited to a popular magazine and recommended that she send it to the Atlantic. And it would later be published as Undersea, and that then reignited Carson's writing career. She began working late into the evenings on a book that she intended for the public called Under the Sea Wind, and it was published in 1941. Late in 1941, in fact. And the book was very positively reviewed, but Pearl Harbor and the US entry into World War II killed any hopes of a popular reception, much to Carson's disappointment. Someone with less fortitude or less confidence in her writing ability might have abandoned the quest for the reading public, but Carson launched her second book project, which would reveal the wonders of contemporary marine biology to readers. In dark moments, Carson referred to the new project as Out of My Depth, or Carson at Sea, but she persisted. When she completed The Sea Around Us, she sent an excerpt to the Atlantic, and in an infamous editorial lapse, the editor of the Atlantic rejected the piece as, quote, too poetic, and he declined to publish it. William Shawn at the New Yorker, however, recognized in the manuscript a new perspective on a little-known subject. Ultimately, most of The Sea Around Us appeared across 3 issues of the magazine to the delight of readers. It was the first profile of anything other than a person, and it won and then when the book subsequently appeared, it won the National Book Award in 1952. It soon appeared on the New York Times bestseller list and remained there for 86 weeks, a record at the time. And when The Sea Around Us was Undersea Wind was then reissued, and it joined The Sea Around Us on the bestseller list. For Carson, literary acclaim and popular success gave her the opportunity to resign from her government job and turn to writing full-time. In addition, financial independence left her with the wherewithal to purchase a small plot of land on the coast of Maine, where she built a small cottage and promptly began to write her third book, The Edge of the Sea. And you can see each of her popular books shown here. So I'd like to take a few minutes to examine Carson's books about the sea. Currently, I'm working on a book called Making Silent Spring, which actually I originally planned as my dissertation some 20 years ago. But I became absorbed in the larger history of pesticides and the science of toxicology. And that became my second book, Banned. But I still wanted to go back to Carson's scientific sources, to Silent Spring, and examine the basis for her dramatic expose of the dangers of indiscriminate use of insecticides to wildlife, ecosystems, and even humans. But to understand her ecological worldview, which is absolutely vital to Silent Spring, as most of you are probably aware, we need to examine ecology as she characterizes it in her books about the sea, which I would argue is just as important. In Under the Sea Wind, Rachel Carson constructed a series of intersecting life histories that constituted the natural history of the seashore from the subtropics to the Arctic. And through the lives of the creatures that occupied the shorelines, Carson assembled an ecological narrative. As she noted in the introduction, Carson confronted the problem of the central character of the narrative, since no single animal could live in all parts of the sea she would describe. And here's what she wrote. Can I just ask, can you actually see the full quotation, or is it blocked? Let me just.
You can see the full.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so you can see how she realized that the sea herself would become the central character. So in 5 focus chapters, she introduces a variety of animals living along the shorelines. She provided each animal with a name, but dodged the charge of anthropomorphism by deploying the scientific name for the species. That approach might have seemed frivolous in the hands of a less adept or experienced writer, but instead the reader becomes accustomed to the language of naturalists. By naming her characters with their scientific names, Carson educated her readers to the importance of these names. I would argue that this is similar to Ursula Le Guin in Earthsea Trilogy, where wizards develop power and control by knowing the names of animals, but not just any names, the secret names. It's in this way, in this naming scheme, that Carson makes the scientific knowable. And people develop more knowledge than they realize. In one of the early chapters, she describes 2 sanderlings. Now here, actually, she didn't actually use the scientific names because effectively they didn't work well. And also she wanted to distinguish the male and the female Blackfoot and a female Silverbar, which served as the focal point of a flock of several hundred shorebirds that had arrived in the night, no coincidence, on the Florida coastline. She noted the remarkable migration of sanderlings, and in the case of the male, the male was on his 4th round trip journey from southernmost South America to the Arctic nesting grounds, 8,000 miles one way, for a total of more than 60,000 miles migrated over 4 years. So after the morning feeding frenzy, the shorebirds retired to rest above the tide line. A beach flea came out to feed, but a ghost crab sprang like a pouncing cat and seized the flea in its large crushing claw, or chela, and devoured it. While the shorebird slept on the beach, a snowy egret fed on killifish in the bright sun of midday. Meanwhile, fishermen prepared to drag a seine through the shallows, and the shorebirds and terns were roused from their sleep. Distracted by the birds and startled by the fishermen, the ghost crab sought refuge in the surf, where an opportunistic and large channel bass struck and devoured it. Later, a school of sharks attacked the bass, the remains of which washed up on the shore, where scavenging beach fleas devoured them. Like so many other scenes in Under the Sea Wind, this one captures the food webs and ecological relationships that constitute the balance of nature. And the focus on the economy of nature recalls Gilbert White's The Natural History of Selborne. And also, I hope that that image of the seashore is particularly vivid for those of you living in Florida. Book 2 of Carson's book focused on the Atlantic mackerel, Scomber scombris, personified by one individual named Scomber. Again, she used the genus name for this single individual. And she follows it from egg to adulthood, which is to say, she presents the mackerel's life history. Carson describes the continental shelf lying 50 to 100 miles from the tide lines between the Chesapeake Capes and Cape Cod. She notes that it's not the distance from the shore that characterizes the transition to true sea, but the depth of the water, 100 fathoms. Phenology is the science of timing of natural events, and Carson explores this subject as well. Mackerel spend the 4 coldest months of the winter in a torpor, their life systems dependent on reserves stored during the summer before. Carson speculates as to the exact process that awakens the mackerel. By April, the colder surface water sinks beneath the warmer water in the depths of the ocean. The warmer water carries to the surface phosphates and nitrates from the bottom, while spring induces plant growth on the land. In the sea, it spurs an increase in the number of diatoms, simple, one-celled, microscopic sized plants. Carson wonders if perhaps the ocean currents carried to the mackerel some awareness of the vegetation flourishing in the waters above. She also wondered if perhaps the currents above the mackerel carried indications of the fresh water flooding into the sea from melting ice and snow, with a corresponding reduction in the salinity of the marine waters. If it was unclear how the mackerel perceived the change in the seasons, they responded dramatically, emerging from the depths of the ocean by the thousands. Carson characterized the abundance of mackerel with respect to geography. The numbers of mackerel are so great as to darken the shore. She wrote, throughout those weeks when fish are rolling in from the open sea and scattered shoals between the edge of the continent and the shore are often darkened as this earth was once dimmed by the passing of another living cloud, the passenger pigeon, the flights of passenger pigeons. Here's an artist reconstruction from 1875. Thus, Carson captures the spectacular abundance of the mackerel on migration. When they reach the nearshore spawning grounds, the mackerel release their eggs and milt. She wrote, they leave in their wake a cloud of transparent spheres of infinitesimal size, a vast sprawling river of life, the sea's counterpart of the river of stars that flows through the sky as the Milky Way. There are known to be hundreds of millions of eggs to the square mile, billions in an area a fishing vessel could cruise over in an hour, hundreds of trillions in the whole spawning area. Unimaginably minute eggs of mind-boggling numbers comparable only to the stars in the Milky Way. Carson shifts between scales seamlessly with these vivid analogies. It's these shifts that bring to my mind Big History with its comparable emphasis on scale. From the spectacular abundance of mackerel spawn, Carson turns to the life history of the single individual, beginning with its embryology. It starts out life as a tiny globule, no larger than a poppy seed, one of 40 to 50,000 eggs shed by one female fish. Hunters, small and large, in the sea surrounding the mackerel, small and large, abounded in the sea surrounding the mackerel eggs. Out of millions of eggs that accompanied the one that would produce Scomber, her title character, thousands did not make it past the first stage of the journey before being swept up by comb jellies. Even a change in the weather spelled doom for the mackerel eggs. Hordes of comb jellies and glassworms, copepods and shrimp, medusae of jellyfish, winged snails, and even crab larvae all fed on the superabundant eggs. Just 6 nights after spawning, the egg split open to release a tiny little fish. Like mackerel eggs, recent hatchlings like Scomber also faced many dangers. Other larger fish, such as anchovies, could eat the tiny mackerel. Young mackerel avoided other fish by spending their days many fathoms beneath the surface of the ocean, and then rising with their chief food source, the plankton again, during the night. In Carson's telling, young mackerel shifted between potential sources of food and potential sources of danger. Humans were also part of Carson's story. She made them part of the ocean ecosystem, along with birds, fish, and invertebrates. Carson renders fishers or fishing vessels and fishing devices as yet another danger faced by Scomber and the mackerel schools. By comparing ships to giant fish, Carson incorporated fishers and their vessels into the predator-prey relationships that are so much a part of the marine ecosystem. Like all effective predators, fishers know their prey. At the captain's order to attempt a set, the seine boat completed 3 revolutions around the mackerel school, driving the fish into a tighter circle each time. The net was 1,200 feet long and dropped to a depth of 100 feet. But Carson shifts back to the mackerel's perspective. Scomber escapes certain death when the mackerel school sounds before the net closes, which is to say, dove deep. And then avoided capture yet again when dogfish ripped through through a seine and released most of the mackerel while consuming just a few. Scomber survived a long succession of encounters with predators from egg to adolescence. As the story of an individual mackerel, Scomber's life is a work of fiction. However, as the life history of mackerel writ large, as the natural history of the sea, Scomber's story is that of any mackerel, all of which must survive myriad encounters with predators at all stages of their lives. To focus on Scomber's remarkable good fortune is to miss Carson's larger thesis, namely, all the animals of the sea interacted as predators one moment and prey the next. By following Scomber through his many encounters with predators, Carson informs the reader about the ecology of predator-prey relationships. I'd like to suggest that Carson revealed more than the ecology of the sea. The opportunity to explore depended less on the ability to travel, and many of the places she described were remote, than on the willingness to explore the wonder of nature through our senses. Carson developed this idea in an article shown here, Help Your Child to Wonder, which she wrote for Women's Home Companion in 1956, not long after her third book about the sea, The Edge of the Sea, was published. 9 years later, it appeared in another form posthumously. That's in 1965. And here she describes exploring the Maine coast, the Maine shoreline with her nephew when he was 20 months. She generalized the child's experience of nature, fresh and new and beautiful, full of wonder and excitement. But as I noted earlier, sadly, wonder was for most people ephemeral and lost before adulthood. For parents who found themselves overwhelmed at the thought of trying to learn everything about nature, you can imagine Carson's vast knowledge of the subject was intimidating. But Carson gave this simple advice. And I love the line, it is not half so important to know as to feel. Ultimately, a passion for nature followed an emotional connection. In all of her books about the sea, Carson inspired wonder in her readers. And it seems to me she accessed this emotion by sharing with her readers her own sense of wonder regarding all aspects of the sea and the diversity of plants and animals that live therein, as well as the interactions among them. Just as Carson experienced amazement in contemplating the many predator-prey relationships and the complex life histories of many species in the oceans and along the seashores, her readers gladly followed in this process of discovery. Carson's fascination with the sea proved infectious, and readers found themselves drawn into a marine world of wonder. In the sense of wonder, Carson emphasized the importance of wonder to children and ultimately adults. In emphasizing the emotional landscapes of Carson's writings, I have two aims. First, I want to argue that readers' emotions were important to Carson. It wasn't sufficient for her books to inform readers. Carson wanted her readers to feel a sense of wonder. My second point here is that Carson wielded the literary skill to elicit specific emotions in her readers. Like a good novelist or a good film writer, she hit the emotional mark as her readers joined in her wonderment at the sheer diversity and complexity of nature, to say nothing of abundance and spectacular scale from the microscopic to the galactic. So let us, we have time. Let us take the last few minutes to talk about Silent Spring, which, as most of you know, has a remarkably dark subject. Yet Carson managed to inspire wonder with the natural world. Moreover, she showed how agricultural chemicals, as I mentioned earlier, threatened animals, humans, and even the very fabric of life. Carson drew on the scientific literature and incorporated references to poetry and prose to animate a challenging and disturbing topic. However, as I also noted earlier, beyond wonder, Silent Spring elicited other emotions. In light of the many references to dying birds, dead fish, and polluted landscapes, the obvious emotion would be sadness or a sense of loss. The sense that Silent Spring is a tragedy permeates nearly every page. However, Carson chose not to emphasize the elements of loss. And this was a smart decision on her part. You cry the blues, you cry alone. Sadness and loss, while necessary aspects of grieving, may not inspire action. If anything, the depression that accompanies loss can lead to an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. Environmental writers and activists struggle with what the environmental historian William Cronin has aptly termed declensionist narratives. Things always go from a time when things were better in the past to a time when things are worse in the present and future. So by the fall of 1958, Carson had been collecting information and writing chapter drafts for the book that would become Silent Spring. Nevertheless, Carson was struggling to marshal the vast amount of material she had collected and present it in a compelling way. Even her title remained in a state of flux. It had gone from Man Against Nature to How to Balance Nature to The Control of Nature. So each of these were working titles for the book that became Silent Spring. And then she received this letter from Edward O. Wilson, who was a young, recently tenured biology professor at Harvard. And he would become the renowned evolutionary biologist and one of the world's authorities on the biology and evolution of ants. So here you can see on October 7th, 1958, Wilson wrote to her and said, as you can see in this letter, I have learned from my friend William L. Brown that you are planning a book dealing with the effects of pest control on the environment. I sincerely hope this is so, because the subject is a vital one and needs to be aired by a writer of your gifts and prestige. With the formalities out of the way, Wilson suggested several references that Carson might find useful. And although she'd collected some of the primary literature that addressed fire ants and their control, Wilson's next recommendation caught her eye: Charles Elton's Ecology of Invasions of Plants and Animals. Wilson again deferred to Carson's research skills. Quite probably you already know about these things, but since the references were on my desk at the moment, it is no trouble to send them just in case. Carson pursued each of his recommendations, but it was Elton's Ecology of Invasions by Animals and Plants that had the most profound effect on her thinking, as indicated by her reply just a month after she received his letter. I am already indebted to you for many things, but perhaps most of all for your reference to Elton's Ecology of Invasions. I had not heard of it until you mentioned it. Although I know his earlier work on populations, I found this enormously stimulating. It cuts through all the foggy discussion of insect pests and their control like a keen north wind. With that encouragement, actually, Wilson forwarded Carson's letter onto Charles Elton himself, who was one of the great Oxford biologists. Here's Elton shown with Aldo Leopold to, our right. The Ecology of Invasions influenced Rachel Carson as she endeavored to link water and soil pollution to pest and weed control. Moreover, she could connect these environmental toxins to wildlife and health. Before she read Elton's book, Carson had amassed considerable evidence of the effects of chemical insecticides. The Ecology of Invasions reinforced her thoughts regarding the relationship between the various kinds of risks in the environment. Nevertheless, it was Carson's genius to animate the story of environmental contamination with evocative images of animals and plants in ecological harmony and scientifically precise descriptions of the damage wrought by environmental chemicals. Silent Spring bridged the ever-widening gap between the science produced in the halls of academia and the science consumed by average Americans and policymakers. In the conclusion to Silent Spring, Carson returned to what she called, just a quick look at Peter Bruegel, the elder, big fish eat the small ones, which Elton cites and includes in the Ecology of Invasions. In the conclusion of Silent Spring, Carson returned to what Elton called the ages of man as applied to scientists, but she broadened the focus as follows. The control of nature is a phrase conceived in arrogance, born of the Neanderthal age of biology and philosophy, when it was supposed that nature exists for the convenience of man. The concepts and practices of applied entomology, for the most part, date from that Stone Age of science. It is our alarming misfortune that so primitive a science has armed itself with the most modern and terrible weapons, and that in turning them against the insects, it has also turned them against the earth. So there are many other direct and indirect references to the ecology of invasions, but it's Carson's polemic against the indiscriminate use of chemicals in the environment that still challenges readers to question attempts to control nature and consider the unintended consequences such efforts pose to wildlife, ecosystems, and humans. Let me just quickly share that with you while I conclude. So I'd like to take just a minute to return to emotions Carson elicited in Silent Spring. Although the themes of wonder and tragedy and loss all play an important role in the story Carson tells in Silent Spring, she avoids the peril of hopelessness by calling forth another emotion, which is to say anger, righteous anger. And it's that motivates the environmental movement. By now, it should be clear how Carson's writings speak to the broad themes of environmental humanities. In so many respects, her books captured the full panorama of the environmental humanities, including literature, history, ethics, and philosophy, theater and drama, as well as music, and above all, emotions. And just to conclude, I'll share with you a statue of Carson that exists here on the campus of Purdue University. So Purdue economic entomologists, which is to say the people who developed insecticides, did not react positively to Silent Spring. And this statue, in a way, oh wait, you want to see it today. There it is today. The statue, in a way, is sort of the artist's attempt at an apology in a sense. So there's the first head of entomology, J.J. Davis, who was head from 1920 to 1956. And there's Carson, who's presenting a butterfly there covered by snow to a young John B. Osmond, who was, as a child, who was the second head of entomology from 1956 on. Although part of me prefers this image of the installation, we can unpack that during Q&A, and I'll just end with an image from here in West Lafayette, a place that I find wondrous called the Soury Bog. And let me just say thank you to Martin, the Tallahassee Scientific Society, and of course, the Department of History at Purdue. Thank you very much. All right, now I need to stop sharing. And how do we want to do questions? There's two ways to go. One, you can start putting, here we go. And Carrie, thank you. And thank you also to Carrie Maddox. So Carrie has suggested if there are any questions, feel free to post them in chat. That might be the easiest way because then I don't have to figure out who to unmute when. All right. Or you could try to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have any questions. No questions? All right.
Fritz, I see a question from Barry Boner, who's a board member. Can you see that? Can you see the
Let's wait. They're in the chat, or
in the chat? Mhm.
oh yeah, it's the Celery Bog. So the Celery Bog is in West Lafayette. It's it's just 100 acres of secondary forest and wetland, and it is never ceasing. It never ceases to amaze me. There's something different there every day. It really is remarkable. That was one of the big concerns about moving from Tallahassee to Indiana amidst the cornfields, was that it wasn't going to be possible to enjoy nature the way it's just so omnipresent in Tallahassee, and St. Mark's is just 20 miles away, and many other places as well. But the celery bog has held its own. So far, I've been able to see more than 200 bird species there, and just a remarkable diversity of wildflowers, trees, animals, and plants, despite its remarkably small size.
Well, that question came from a Purdue graduate. I happen to
Oh, wonderful. So you know.
what she was talking about. Oh, I see here this other question from Barry was directed to me. He asks, or he says here, it seems we need some of that emotion to share the need to respect science for what it brings to us, as a question.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that is what's so remarkable about Carson's writings, is that her scientific descriptions are accurate, and yet she manages to animate fairly dense scientific topics like toxicology, even physical oceanography, which on the face of it is not are extremely challenging topics, and yet she manages to make them accessible to a wide range of readers. This is from Shannon Davidson. I wonder, given the many ecological and scientific problems that we currently face, often at intersection with the economy and industry, are there particular present day authors that you think are or could connect with today's audience in the ways that Carson connected with hers? Yeah, certainly, I don't know, Carl Sapina leaps to mind as one example of someone who manages to convey the wonder of the sea, but also the threats that faced by various organisms there. Other writers who are working, well, the wonder of birds, Jennifer Ackerman is publishing quite a bit. Having said that, I think there is room for Carson's remarkable ability to connect the threats faced by wildlife and ecosystems to the health and wellness of humans. And I think there's something remarkable about Silent Spring in the way that she manages to make these large sort of incomprehensible threats personal to her individual readers in a way that actually motivated action as opposed to hopelessness. Well,
Fritz, actually, I
yes.
have a broad question to pose to you, and that is, your field is something different than we've heard from. So your field is looking at science from somewhat outside of the technical aspect of science. And
Yeah.
so that's something I really appreciate in this talk tonight. And I'd like to know a little bit about how you came to that place.
Right. So I sort of gestured to it, although I don't generally, but I've been a bird watcher my whole life. And so I feel like I've always been able to appreciate Carson's sense of wonder. And in a lot of ways, she was a bird watcher too, very active bird watcher. And, I've been to the places where she frequented with her group of birding friends in the Washington, D.C. area. So I've always felt like I could really relate to that. When I got to college and I was studying biology, I was finding that there was, and this is in the late 1980s, when the emphasis in science was very much focused on molecular biology and biochemistry, where I didn't feel the same kind of resonance. And there was a real shift away from natural history and the study of whole organisms and ecology, at least where I was in school. I've always kind of regretted that I never took a course with E.O. Wilson, because I think he transcended the scientific study of organisms, and yet found larger meanings in evolutionary biology in a way that my other courses weren't. So it was fortunate that the history of science was an option, and the opportunity to study not just science courses, the science courses that interested me, but also the stories of the scientists and how their ideas evolved. Later on in graduate school, I studied environmental history, which focuses on the relationship between humans and the landscape over large swaths of time. And I've been fortunate, both at Purdue and before at Florida State, to be able to teach both the history of environmental sciences and environmental history. In a lot of ways, I feel like environmental history brings the emphasis on nature and the environment together with change across time in a way that really appeals to me. Oh, it looks here's another question from Barry Borner. It seems so many have lost that childlike wonder about science and the natural world. I think we need to reclaim that somehow. Do you have any ideas how we might accomplish that? So I started this project a long time ago, but I actually wrote it up while I was a Fulbright scholar at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And it just happened that their general studies courses, their required courses for all undergraduates, were effectively one course in the history of science for both Western and Chinese science and technology, and then another course in sort of the philosophy of science, so one was dialogue with nature, the history of science, and another was a dialogue with humanity, which is sort of a introduction to philosophy, again, both Western and Eastern. And they read Silent Spring, they read Charles Darwin, they read James Watson, the the double helix, as well as many, many other classics in the history of science. But what was amazing to me is that the university was very much emphasizing core liberal studies in a way that I was finding that US universities are moving in the other direction towards an ever more focused study and away from the liberal arts. So I think there was something remarkably inspiring about this shift at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And actually, Chinese universities writ large, they recently went from a 3-year course of study to a 4-year course of study. And that adding that 4th year enabled additional liberal studies courses. So I think that's part of it. It's making science accessible. I mean, not all, I think there's a resistance. I think students need to have positive experiences in their science and math courses if they're going to continue in them. Well, it looks like we've hit 7, and no obligations to stay past 7, but if people do want to stay and have other questions, I'm happy to continue to answer them. But I do want to say thanks again to Carrie and Martin and all of you for attending tonight.
Well, we want to thank you, Fritz. This has been so interesting. Many of us are scientists. Some are appreciators of science, and so this is such a nice blend of those two concerns. I do have a question for the audience, and that is if you're not a board member, would you take a second and let us know where you heard about this talk? We're always trying to figure out the best way to get messages out about different events. So if you heard about it through Facebook or Meetup or word of mouth, please let us know, and I'd appreciate that. Okay, I think questions are winding down. So anybody want to turn on their microphone and ask a question live, face to face? If not, I'm sure that Martin has your information, so we'll be in touch. And this has just been delightful. So Martin, did you have some last words?
Well, again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. A special thank you to Fritz. We also have Shannon, who is one of our board members, who had a class with him at one point as well. I really enjoyed all the classes I had with Fritz, which is the reason I kept signing up for them. And then last night in the course I teach at FSU, I mentioned to my students as we were discussing JAWS and responses by governments to environmental issues and larger social things, talking history and philosophy of science, I mentioned this. So there are a lot of students that were eager to hear from Fritz, and again, thank you. So we'll be talking about Rachel Carson later on as we watch other movies in the semester.
Well, thanks again. It's really been a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you. Despite all the limitations of Zoom, I'd rather be in Tallahassee, to be honest, but it's okay. We'll get through it.
Well, let's see, Barry, you want to unmute yourself and ask a question? It looks like you want to do that. I don't think I can unmute you.
Oh, sure. Oh, maybe I can.
There. Okay.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
I guess one of my things about science in general is that I'm sort of I might have 2 degrees in chemistry, but my interests are very broad. And it seems to me there's just so much benefit that we've gotten from science. It's frustrating for me to think of all those people that somehow want to say it's just somebody else's opinion or any number of things to discount it without taking any consideration into, what other things would be attached to what they're discounting in terms of, I mean, we're, especially up there where you are, you've got heat in the house, you got snow blowers or who knows what else. We can drive wherever we want to if we have vehicles. Those are all benefits that make our lives so much more easy and beneficial and pleasurable. It's just so mind-boggling that somehow those are all forgotten, and they only look at, oh, we have to do this or do that, and ignore what the consequences of that are. And I just, wish there was, and I guess that's why I was asking my question.
Yeah.
What can we do as scientists, or retired scientists, as in my case, to communicate with the public that amazement? It's like cosmology a lot. There's all sorts of crazy things there that are just, if you want mind-boggling, that's where you need to go.
Right, right.
So I just wondered if you had any general comments along that topic.
I mean, I agree with you about the importance of science and technology, and how so many aspects of life as we know it depends on technology. In another version of the talk, or another talk that I give, I talk about the ongoing chemical dependence on agricultural chemicals, which continues right to the present. Just to give people a chance to think about trade-offs, risk trade-offs. On the one hand, we have certain expectations of our produce, and on the other, it's unacceptable to have produce that's contaminated in other ways. Anyway, I sort of talk about where that leads us in terms of chemical insecticides and genetically modified organisms. But I think the key thing, and I think what's wonderful about Tallahassee Scientific Society, is sort of serving as a bridge to the public from between scientists and the public. And I think that it plays a really vital role. It's something that I always enjoyed while I was in Tallahassee, and I'd like to see it in other places as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks again, everyone.
I posted our website, tallysci.org. If anyone's interested, come visit, come say hello, and hope to see you at another event down the road. And
Thank you. Good night.
that, I think we'll sign off. So thanks again.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.